seems like signups have kind of slowed down, so we're going to jump right in, and people who join a few minutes late can join us whenever they're ready. So thank you all for joining Avestria's Women's Health webinar series. We're really excited today to talk about autoimmune disease and disorders. Just a quick rundown before we officially jump into the content of the webinar. For those of you who are frequent guests, you'll kind of know how this format works, but for those of you who are new, we're going to spend a couple minutes at the beginning talking about Avestria, talking about why we invest in women's health, why we're doing these webinars. And then we're going to hand it over to our guests of the day, and you can see them on the screen. And they'll talk a little bit about their focus, what they do, autoimmune diseases, what you should know. We'll have time for questions. However, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them in the Q&A box whenever they come up. You don't have to wait until the end of their presentation. And then after they present, after we answer audience questions, Linda and Tracy from Avestria will take the screen back and talk a little bit more about Avestria if you're interested. Just some general information as well. This webinar will be recorded, so look for the recording shortly after. And we do try and do these webinars regularly. We're going to have one coming up next week. So if you like what you see here and want to learn more about women's health through a webinar series, we'd be happy to have you for our next webinar. And now I'm going to turn the webinar mic over to Linda and Tracy from Avestria, who will give you a little bit of information about Avestria before we jump into our guests.
So hi, I'm Linda Grube. I'm a co-founder of Avestria Ventures. We're based in San Francisco. We were founded in 2019. Our background is as healthcare operators and investors, and we have extensive industry networks. Tracy and I met back in 2010 when we were working at Novartis Diagnostics, and we have managed to continue to work together still today really well. Next slide. In terms of what Avestria does, we're a venture capital firm that invests in early stage, and that's defined as seed and Series A, private companies that are working to improve women's health. We define women's health as conditions that affect women exclusively, disproportionately, or differently. So obviously reproductive health and menopause impact women, but you may not know that autoimmune disease, 80% of patients are women. Alzheimer's disproportionately impacts women. And then there are diseases like cardiovascular disease or oncology that impact men and women differently. And we invest across all of the life science subsectors, so devices, diagnostics, digital health, life science tools, services, and therapeutics. Tracy, can you do this slide?
Sure. And so while we are extremely data-driven, and our companies are as well, we really want to focus on how do you change outcomes. And I think that from a biological perspective, we know that there are differences between men and women at the cellular and molecular level, and that carries through to tissues and organ systems. That being said, from a scientific and research perspective, we haven't been appreciating those differences and stratifying patient populations in a way that really enables us to provide optimal care for everyone. So women have not been in clinical trials, they weren't let into clinical trials until 1993, and it's been only recently that female cell lines were required to be included in basic science research. We also really understand from a clinical perspective that there are many areas where women have worse clinical outcomes because we are working off a standard that's based off of research on men. And you can see some of those statistics there. That being said, we're also seeing a dearth of funding in a number of areas in the public government sector, as well as public and private R&D funding. That being said, we are very encouraged about the tailwinds that are happening from a regulatory perspective, with the encouragement of including cell lines with a requirement for the FDA to require diverse patient populations to be included in clinical trials, as well as policy such as the Omnibus Act and other areas in the women's health initiatives coming out of the White House that are really now shining a spotlight on what we've understood to be an unmet need for a very long time. So we're really encouraged to see that as well, and more funding coming into the sector. So we also see that there's an enormous market opportunity here in women's health. Because we think about women's health as really all of these areas, it is really touched by, it really is a component of healthcare overall, which is a $4 trillion market, growing very quickly annually. But we can also see that the venture investments in women's health have really more recently started to increase. And so with the downturn in 2022, 2023, that's been a little bit less, but we are encouraged to see that there's a lot more interest, and we're thrilled to see the quality of the entrepreneurs doing impactful work in this space. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Linda to introduce our panelists for today and let you hear from them.
So we are thrilled to be investors in ViuHealth. And today we have Mel Igwe representing ViuHealth. She's co-founder and COO. Mel is a Houston native, passionate about healthcare, equity, and leveraging technology to improve health outcomes for all people. With nearly a decade of healthcare experience, Mel is currently a co-founder and COO for ViuHealth, a digital health platform designed to aid in managing autoimmune conditions. And along with Mel, we're honored to have Dr. Samantha Shapiro, who is a board-certified rheumatologist and internist with expertise in autoimmune and inflammatory conditions. She founded the Division of Rheumatology at Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Shapiro is an active American College of Rheumatology member, volunteering her time to the insurance subcommittee. She is the executive editor of Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, leading the charge to redefine medical education. And we will let Mel and Dr. Shapiro take it from here. Thank you.
So let me get off mute. One, thanks again so much for the opportunity for us to be able to share our solution and how ViuHealth is really impacting the lives of people living with various autoimmune conditions. So just to kind of orient this presentation, I'm going to go over what ViuHealth does, and then I'm going to bring in Dr. Shapiro to get her vantage point from a rheumatologist that is living this, seeing this, and how really get her perspective on how a solution like this is impactful for people living with autoimmune conditions. So one, I want to make sure everyone can see my screen. Hopefully,
Yeah, we
I'm
can
sure.
see you. It's all good.
Perfect. All right, awesome. So this stat goes back and forth, but it's been reported that there are over 50 million Americans that are living with autoimmune diseases. And living with an autoimmune disease can be really challenging. Getting diagnosed can be very arduous. Identifying a provider that can really understand what you need during your treatment throughout the course of your condition can also be challenging and might change, as well as just frankly present lifelong struggles for someone that is living with these conditions. And just to take a step back, autoimmune conditions are diseases like MS, lupus, Sjogren's. They disproportionately impact women. When people of color are having these conditions, the conditions can present very differently. And really there are severe challenges that patients living with these conditions experience. Many of them are highlighted on this slide here. The position that ViuHealth took is that if we can help patients and really place them at the center of the autoimmune ecosystem, then the downstream of that is being able to impact providers effectively, impact pharmaceutical companies effectively, as well as employers, as well as providers. And simply put, what we're building is the consequential stack in the autoimmune ecosystem. By ensuring that patients are able to capture their longitudinal medical records as just discussed earlier, the challenge of an autoimmune disease is ever evolving and changing. And having access to your clinical picture is very important. We provide that to patients. We also provide patients with an app where they can track their symptoms, their flares, their medications, nutrition, as well as be seamlessly connected to clinical trials, which is really important. And all of this is in an effort to, one, address those challenges that patients are facing. And the addressing of those challenges really then cascades to us being able to be effective with the customers that are looking to support these patient populations. So one, our solution is able to support pharmaceutical companies by seamlessly connecting people living with various conditions to clinical trials. Clinical research is still not as well represented by women and definitely not by populations of color, but our solution is able to seamlessly connect patients to clinical trials really based off of their medical records. When it comes to providers, simply put, and we'll go into greater detail as I have the conversation with Dr. Shapiro, treating and managing autoimmune conditions is challenging. The uniqueness in presentation, what patients are experiencing, and really the lifestyle support that needs to happen from patient to patient is something that not a lot of providers have time to do. And what our solution aims to do is to be that conduit to be able to easily have patients put in their personalized data for them to be able to track their flares, track their symptoms, track their nutrition, all of those elements that are very critical in understanding their care, but be able to have it in one place. And on top of that, be able to have that go back to their provider. With us being able to offer care management and really having that layer of that relationship between patients and their providers, that very important data that is not being captured in between doctors' visits is now able to be captured, one, from the patient, and then two, because patients are also, they have a autoimmune focused care team that works with them on a monthly basis to really delve into the challenges that they're facing. All of these interactions are reimbursed and really present a beautiful opportunity for the patient to have that additional lifestyle support, be able to have really an area for them to track and store their data, and then also have that data be filtered through the lens of a autoimmune focused clinician that's able to provide that data in a comprehensive care plan back to their provider, really enhancing visibility of their care and really making sure that some of these insights that could be missed because there wasn't an ability to track it, or even for the patient to understand what was happening, that can now happen. And also really enabling to expand capacity for that provider. So now more of their time can be focused on treating the patient versus some of these other lifestyle like solutions for support. Within this ecosystem also is employers and payers. And simply put, the cost of managing autoimmune diseases is very expensive. And not having adequate data, not being able to activate patients that are using healthcare through their employer to really identify how they can improve their care, there's a high cost that's associated with that for employers. So the way that we're positioning ourselves is really by being the consequential stack within the autoimmune ecosystem, where by really centering the patient, we're able to serve all of these different customers, but doing it in a way that we don't have to acquire the customer, or rather the patient, again, because through our relationships with their providers, we have access to them. And these other entities were able to direct to the patient, such as clinical trials, as well as getting the patient through employers and payers. So the way all of this is accomplished is, I mentioned it briefly, but to go deeper, we offer patients a complete platform for autoimmune care management. And simply put, patients are, they have access to a dedicated autoimmune care team that comprises of autoimmune health coaches, registered nurses, nutrition support, as well as asynchronous 24/7 support. This is really in an effort to make sure that some of those psychosocial needs are met by having that additional support, but then also really having patients have a understanding of their what they're experiencing through their autoimmune journey. And just to dovetail into that, our solution has powerful tools where patients are able to track their flares, really build that repository of their personalized analytics so that they understand what's going on. I really want to stress that the presentation of different autoimmune diseases can be very unique. So I always like to give the example, and I think Dr. Shapiro will appreciate this, that both of us can have lupus, but the expression of that lupus could be completely different. So being very in tune with what is happening with respect to your unique autoimmune journey is very important. And we built solutions with really the evolving autoimmune journey in mind. It also includes medication reminders, because many times if you have an autoimmune condition, you're taking a lot of medications, as well as being able to be seamlessly matched to clinical trials. Just to dial in on that, because we're able to have your medical records, your comprehensive medical records, we're able to actually match your medical records to the inclusion/exclusion criteria of various protocols that we're contracted for, and really make it a very easy experience of being identified and then being connected to clinical trial sites. Of course, there's the consolidation of medical records, really making sure that that source of clinical truth with respect to what is happening to you with respect to your diagnoses, your labs, the medication history that you have, as well as the current medications that you're taking, your past procedures, and just really being able to give you a picture of what is happening clinically in combination with that personalized data that you're tracking as well. And last but definitely not least is managing stress is very significant for autoimmune patients. So we developed a suite of wellness tools to really help with stress management. So I wanted to give kind of a way that patients are able to find us and get onto our platform and what happens. So here you have an example of Nyota, who really found ViuHealth through her provider. As stated before, the two customers that we support are providers, many of which that are in specialties like rheumatology, gastroenterology, and many more. But Nyota would find ViuHealth through her provider. And in this case, Nyota is newly diagnosed with lupus. What would happen is that Nyota comes to her provider. Her provider essentially prescribes ViuHealth. And there's a referral that's sent. And Nyota is able to download the app, complete a HIPAA authorization form for the consolidation of her medical records. She's able to meet her care team, And within our app, we actually have telehealth opportunities. So you're able to have those virtual meetings. In this meeting, able to discuss what current challenges have been, and really helps the care team member to orient how this program is going to go for her. Because keep in mind, it's very focused on that unique patient versus kind of providing like an algorithm or a one size fits all. As going on, Nyota meets with her health coach for one-on-one telehealth visits. And these visits are really oriented around lifestyle, behavior changes, nutrition, as well as autoimmune disease education. We believe that ensuring that people living with these conditions, having them be as health literate as possible is very, very, very important. And there's tons of research to support the more health literate you are about your condition, the more that you're able to have more positive outcomes. And ultimately, there's just continued support with respect to her care team. I'm going to stop there and then kind of move this presentation over to speaking with Dr. Shapiro and kind of get her clinical perspective of a solution like ViuHealth and the impact that it's having with respect to autoimmune patients.
Awesome. Well, it's really nice to meet all of you. Thanks for tuning in. I'm happy to share my side of things as a physician and what I commonly encounter when taking care of patients and why I think ViuHealth is so awesome. I want to preface by saying that I am not frequently involved with companies in a role like this, but when ViuHealth came across my desk, I was really inspired by what they're trying to do, because I honestly think that they have the right mission in mind. And so I'm happy to be here and speak to why I feel that way today. So, within rheumatology, where let me first start with what that is. Rheumatologists manage systemic autoimmune diseases. So meaning you have an autoimmune disease that's picking on the joints or multiple areas at one time, then you see a rheumatologist. If your autoimmune disease only picks on one organ system, say the thyroid or the GI tract or the brain, then you see the specialist in that field. So all to say, rheumatologists know a lot about autoimmune disease. And when we take care of these patients, there's two things that are really important for a person to feel their best. On the one side of things, you have their medications and even their diagnosis and really understanding what all the moving pieces of their condition are. Because as Melanie said, every person with these diseases is their own special snowflake. They have their own special set of symptoms, which can make it a lot more challenging to manage than high blood pressure, for example. On the other side, you have the lifestyle changes, because those are absolutely required in order for a person to feel their best with lupus or any of these other conditions. Now, on the physician side, the medications are tough enough. These are complicated drugs that suppress the immune system, have a lot of potential side effects, need to be closely monitored, and they're really expensive. So oftentimes we have to fight with insurance companies to get approval of these. There's a lot of paperwork, and it doesn't leave a lot of the time we would want to otherwise talk with patients about the lifestyle stuff that is so important to them. Also, the questions patients often come to us with about diet: how do I lose weight? How do I manage my stress? What's the right thing to eat? This isn't stuff that we were necessarily taught in medical school. And if we were, we got maybe 30 minutes of it in one lecture. So there's a time issue and there's an expertise knowledge issue when it comes to answering those lifestyle questions that are so important to patients. So that is really where ViuHealth comes in, okay? Because left without ViuHealth, the way patients learn about that is from a lot of stuff on the internet, which, as you know, might not always be the best place to go for information. So ViuHealth really acts as the bridge between patients and physicians, between the lifestyle stuff that they need and the medical stuff that they need, the medications, the different procedures, that sort of thing. ViuHealth is awesome here because they have the time and the knowledge to do that. So an average patient visit is about 15 minutes, which I think is a travesty, but it's just the truth. In 15 minutes, is it possible for me to do a complete physical exam, catch up with you on your disease, review all of your labs, and tinker with your medications and finish my documentation and call your insurance company? Probably not, but that's what I've got to do. It certainly leaves no time to answer my patient's questions about, doc, how can I lose weight? I'm really stressed. I'm having these problems at home. I have anxiety about my condition. I don't understand it. I need more education. There isn't always that time. So ViuHealth providing professionals who are autoimmune health coaches, dietitians, nurses, providing an extra hour to a patient a month of one-on-one personal time to go through all of that stuff. When they have resources that are evidence-based, and I help fact check all of them, okay, about what diet changes you could make, about mindfulness techniques, stress-based stuff, all stuff that has been shown to decrease the chance of flares of autoimmune disease. That's invaluable, to give a patient that face time with someone who actually knows what they're talking about, as opposed to sending them to the internet where there is snake oil being peddled left and right and a bunch of misinformation. That is a service to patients, and it's really reassuring from a physician perspective to know that they're getting good information and they're getting that quality time that I want to spend with them, but don't necessarily have time to do. So I think that's the majority of my spiel. I'll see if Melanie has more questions for me, or of course, if any of you have questions for me. But thanks for listening.
Yeah, no, I think that was very flattering. Definitely appreciate that. And definitely wanted to give the full picture, right? Because it's one thing to have the ear of the patient and understand their unique challenges, but by understanding their unique challenges, there's all these different challenges that providers face, that pharma faces, that payers face as well, in trying to service people living with these conditions. And I appreciate you highlighting the provider's vantage point of how the solution that we're building with really having the patient be first can really be beneficial for the entire autoimmune ecosystem. So I guess now we can open it up for questions if people need to learn more, have points of clarification.
All right, I'm going to jump in for those of you who joined the webinar a little bit late. I'm Ava Epker. I'm the Director of Marketing at Avestria, and I'm going to be sort of moderating the Q&A portion. We do have a question in the Q&A box, and I have several coming in via email. But let's start with the one on the Q&A box, which is, can you talk a little bit more about how ViuHealth is going to be profitable? And more sort of, this person is asking what portion can be reimbursed by payers and which portion or what the patient's going to be paying out of pocket, which I think is a very important question given how expensive this can be, an autoimmune condition can be.
Yeah, one, that's a great question. Two, it also went into the calculus for why we wanted ViuHealth to be sponsored when it comes to the care delivery portion of our business. That out-of-pocket expense can be very challenging. And for the most part, what we're seeing, at least, is that I believe almost 90% of the care management portion is reimbursed through insurance. And there's a nominal copay. And those copays are ranging anywhere from $10 to maybe max $30 per visit, but that's what we're seeing. So not something that is what you might see on market from direct to consumer, where patients are being asked to pay like hundreds of dollars a month for that care. It's maybe $10 to $30 for copay. The other portion of our business to date is that we recruit patients with different autoimmune conditions to clinical trials. So when it comes to clinical trials, we're actually paid in three ways. There's a platform that's a subscription model that we have now that is paid up front every month for the studies that we support. On top of that, and apologies for noise, and on top of that, we're also paid a startup fee as well as a referral fee for every patient that we successfully randomize for studies. So that's essentially how we make money. And with respect to the margins, I think we have like a blended margin that's fairly high, like over 75% with respect to both of those businesses. The clinical trial business has really, really strong margins, and the care management business has good margins that through opportunities such as remote therapeutic monitoring, that's also bringing up our margins as well.
I also want to emphasize a point which I think was brought up slightly earlier, but women and minorities were not included in clinical trials until about like 30 years ago. So, and even now, there's the NIH Revitalization Act that made women and minorities be participants in clinical trials. Previously, they were excluded. But even now, and Melanie and Dr. Shapiro, you can correct me if I don't have this right, but only about 6% of NIH funded trials have, is it a representative minority population?
That's right.
Yeah.
Dr. Shapiro, if you want to jump in there. And really we founded to work on all of those fronts, right? Like there's a low representation of women, there's an even lower representation of diverse populations. And then when you are confronted with the intersection, particularly in immunology, where there can actually be quite a high prevalence of people of diverse backgrounds with these conditions, and the women, it presents a unique opportunity to be impactful with respect to ensuring those populations are represented in clinical research. But Dr. Shapiro, if you have anything.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to add, lupus in particular, it really affects everybody differently. And Black women with lupus can develop a lot more severe manifestations than people of other races and ethnicities. And Black women are severely misrepresented in those clinical trials to the point that, okay, we got a new drug that's approved for this severe manifestation of lupus, but it's not actually studied in the people who are most likely to get that severe complication. And so the fact that ViuHealth is able to provide more of a gateway to get more of the people who matter in these trials is awesome.
So then jumping on a little bit on that last answer, we've mentioned lupus several times. Are there 3-ish autoimmune conditions that you see that are more popular in women, or are they all more popular in women? And if the answer is yes to that second question, which ones do you see the most of through ViuHealth and Dr. Shapiro through your practice and research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so the majority of them, you'll definitely see a higher, like on our platform, right? So before expanding to care management, and we were supporting just clinical trials, we support both care management and clinical research now. We were seeing about 74% were women that were on our platform, right? And many of them were over-indexed in, of course, like lupus, MS, as well as some other endocrine conditions. But for the most part, it's majority women that we see. Where it starts to get split is in some of the GI conditions, like ulcerative colitis and as well as Crohn's disease, where there's more of a parity between men and women. It still skews more women, but Dr. Shapiro would love to.
Yeah, just as a general rule of thumb, women tend to be more affected. There are a couple diseases where it's an even split, but more women in general have these autoimmune conditions. I also would like to point out that fibromyalgia, which is not exactly an autoimmune condition, but lives in this world. Rheumatologists manage it because a rheumatologist defined it many years ago, even if it's not autoimmune. Also disproportionately affects women, and especially of all of the conditions that ViuHealth can help with, lifestyle is the number one thing we need for fibromyalgia. We don't have great medications for it. So I just want to throw that in there too, that yeah, all these conditions disproportionately affect women, and then fibromyalgia, majorly more women than men.
Well, thank you. That's really interesting. And then again, sort of jumping off of previous answers, has there been an increase, or have you two seen an increase in the prevalence of autoimmune diseases? And if so, do we know why? Is it just more education, more people maybe advocating for themselves, or is there another reason entirely?
I'll let Dr. Shapiro start this one. Yeah.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, prevalence is going up, and that's for a lot of different reasons. So number one is greater awareness. Number two is better diagnostic tools. Also, we just know more about these conditions. We have more tests that can diagnose them. Although a lot of these diagnoses still remain purely clinical, meaning based on symptoms and physical exam, no magic test that just tells you what the answer is. And then there is also data out there just speaking to a lot of environmental changes in the world that could potentially be interacting with us as humans and resulting in more autoimmune conditions down the line. Now that's a big umbrella, of things, whether it be I don't know, environmental exposures from pollution or things that we eat. Like it's a very broad umbrella, but there is evolving science showing that that's also contributing to more autoimmunity in the population.
And then Melanie, do you have anything to add, or should we go on to another question?
Yeah, the thing that I would like to add is that I do think that because we've had a shift in the way people are consuming healthcare, particularly millennials and Gen Zers, the way that they're getting educated and therefore advocating for themselves, I think that has a significant component to that, right? There's these different resources that people are finding and really learning how to advocate for themselves, really learning how to track their symptoms and articulate their symptoms in a way that is helping to get to that diagnosis, I think, a little faster than days before. And also, just frankly, I think more women are feeling empowered and being very firm that, like, hey, these symptoms are not, psychosomatic. Like, this is really happening to me and I need to be listened to. And I think that real push, that change in consumerism in healthcare, as well as enhanced patient advocacy, is the reason why you're seeing more, in addition to the environmental changes that are happening, unfortunately, due to what's happening right now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, women too, way more than men, when they come into a doctor or healthcare professional, they tend to be dismissed with mental illness than with something like an autoimmune disease or even a heart attack. So this is very unfortunate and really tragic reality for women. So the fact that we have people and companies like ViuHealth and Dr. Shapiro and Mel, addressing this is huge for women everywhere, as well as just for people in general. So we have a question that came in. How are you marketing your platform? And I think this is a Melanie question. Are rheumatologists your primary target? Do you market directly to patients as well? If fibromyalgia is also relevant, are you planning to market it to pain specialists? That's a lot of questions. So if you need me to repeat any one of them, just
No. It was an excellent question. Yeah, so the way we have a bifurcated marketing strategy. So our clinical trial marketing is heavily done through conferences as well as outreach. We're really fortunate now because we've done really well with some top pharma companies. We actually get a fair amount of inbound. Like our latest customer that they came because they someone had moved to their company. They were like, hey, worked with DrugView, now ViuHealth, they're great, want to work with them again. So that's what's happening there. When it comes to the provider side, we actually have a multi-pronged approach. So we just inked a partnership with the Leaders Room, which is actually a managed group organization that works with independent rheumatology practices rather, to offer different solutions to really maximize revenue as well as really improve care. So that's one way that we're getting to providers. We also have our own provider outreach strategy as well. And rheumatologists, I should note, are a big focus for us. They're not the only focus. So we also this year want to acquire gastroenterologists, endocrinologists, and the pain question was excellent. Pain specialists, we're actually working with one right now to craft that because of how much of an issue managing pain is with people that are either living with fibromyalgia or just people in general that have autoimmune conditions. So that is a specialty that we're going to be going after. We have a provider lead salesperson that we just brought on. And yeah, that's essentially how we are working to get the word out. The last thing that I should mention is that because we also support immunology clinical trials, many of them are actually having the research conducted at practices that see patients. We're also engaging those practices as well and sharing with them care management solutions so that we can support them with respect to clinical trials, but in addition to that, also sharing care management. So a lot of different ways, because there's a lot of different doctors in a lot of different places, but I really love that question. And it's really important because it also goes to like, how are we thinking through a footprint and reach, and really just how are we getting our solution out there? So whoever wrote that, much appreciated.
Thank you. And then I think we have time for one final question, which is sort of a two-pronged question, and it's meant for both of you. Is there an easy or short explanation for why women have a higher instance of autoimmune diseases than men? And what, just to sum up, I guess, kind of your entire presentation, is there something specific that women and men can do in order to better their health, especially if they have an autoimmune disease?
So short answer, no, we don't know. It likely has something to do with hormonal shifts. Sometimes we see a lot of these autoimmune diseases come out around pregnancy or after pregnancy. But our understanding of it is still really very simplified, I would say. And then what was part two? Is there anything we can do? Okay.
Yeah, what can women and men do to advocate for their health, especially if they have an autoimmune disease?
Yeah. So, well, I would say, first of all, if you smoke cigarettes, quit smoking. Okay, that's going to be beneficial across the board for any autoimmune disease, along with a myriad of other health problems. But the second is the patients that I take care of who do best are the ones who advocate for themselves and really start to implement these lifestyle changes and care about them. And at this point in time, those are very educated self-starter type people who are capable of finding all of that information on their own and getting that stuff set up for themselves. So when it comes to a solution that could reach more people than the hyper-educated and motivated types, I think ViuHealth is a good answer there, because feeling your best with an autoimmune disease is not just about taking your medications and going to appointments. There's other stuff that needs to happen in the background.
Yeah, and I think what I can add to that question is more of the forward or future looking is we're consolidating medical records and comprehensive medical records to the first is to help people have that longitudinal view. But as we're compiling this data over time, we really, really hope to be instrumental for providers, payers, pharma, in having a deep amount of data that can provide these unique insights based on patients, right? The caution that I have with that is that there's a certain volume of data that we would need to really be able to slice and dice those insights. But I'm really confident that as we keep progressing and as we keep compiling this data, and frankly, as like even our ways of interpreting that data become more refined through generative AI and different LLMs, we'll be able to provide more of that upstream information around what might be happening, and then also be able to impact the downstream management of that care by helping, providers with like clinical decision support, or even helping to have patients be better educated based off of their patient profile. So nothing right now, but hopefully that can change as companies like ViuHealth and others that are really invested in changing the landscape for people living with these conditions, we can be impactful.
Yeah, thank you. And there's so much that ViuHealth does, I think, that maybe people without an autoimmune disease don't realize as incredibly important, from recruiting for clinical trials to consolidating records to tracking flare-ups. So maybe it's tied to some sort of lifestyle change or something you ate or how you're feeling or stress in your life. So for those without autoimmune diseases, I feel like they might not have the personal understanding, but based on what we've talked about, based on what Avestria has seen of ViuHealth, based on what we've read about autoimmune diseases, this is really, really impactful for patients who may not have another avenue. So, and for patients who do have another avenue, but want everything together in one place. So thank you so much, Melanie from ViuHealth, and then Dr. Samantha Shapiro, for just sharing your insights and for what you do for patients with autoimmune diseases. We really, really appreciate it on behalf of Avestria.